we are here to talk about something that you have shared with us for a long time, and that's helped me a lot to understand more about why do testing and why it's important for all of who are involved in the creation of a product, service, application, or whatever, have to know and understand what is holistic testing. So for those that are not familiar with your concept yet, can you explain about what holistic testing is and how did you come up with this idea?
All right, I will, and it's part of my presentation. So should I just start with the presentation?
Oh, if you want to introduce yourself, and then we can start.
Okay, yeah. So I'm Janet Gregory. I'm from a city, I guess, called Calgary, and it's in Alberta, Canada. So I challenge you folks to go look in your maps if you don't know where that is. And the idea of testing in Agile teams. So yeah, let me think about it. So when we're talking about testing in Agile teams, more and more people they're just doing Agile. There's no more waterfall versus Agile. Everybody's trying to do a little bit of Agile. Whether they're doing it successfully or not, I don't know. So it seems kind of silly to talk about Agile testing because it's just testing as we know it. So when I was trying to figure out a different name for it, that's where holistic testing comes in, and I'll explain it as part of my presentation. Because I think holistic is a much better word to use. Our branding, and when I say our, I always talk about Lisa Crispin, because she's my co-author and co-conspirator in just about everything we do. Our branding is Agile testing, so it's kind of hard to change things to talk about holistic testing, but that's what I'm going to do today. So first of all, I've got to share my screen so everybody can see it. Share. Can everybody see it? All right. So holistic testing. My Twitter ID is on this, so if you tweet, please feel free to use it. Just Janet Gregory CA for Canada. It's to remind people that I'm actually from Canada. People take for granted that I'm from someplace else. So let's start. A little bit more about me, because I think this is important to show where I came from and how it developed. I started off as a programmer. I did that for about 6 years. And then my next career was a QA manager, also a release manager and a support manager. This was all in a waterfall kind of environment, a little bit chaotic, but what it did was give me a really good overview of the whole cycle, the whole development cycle from the beginning to the end. By the way, QA to me stands for question asker, which I think every tester should be. But then I changed jobs and was lucky enough to move into Agile. And my view of software development changed immensely. I started speaking. I started writing and sharing what I had learned, because when I first was in my first team in Agile, which was back in about 2000, 2001, there was nothing written. There was absolutely nothing at all. And so Lisa and I met each other, and well, we started writing the books and things just moved forward. But we wanted to share what we had learned, because we learned it the hard way. And hopefully other people don't have to do that. And that's all I'm going to say about me. So today, the title is Holistic Testing in DevOps, because DevOps seems to be the latest buzzword, what people are talking about. So I'll talk about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about testing early, and then we'll move into testing and the deployment pipeline, and really look at testing your releases and how testing activities are part of everything we do, and how we learn to adapt and so on. It's high level. absolutely, because that's all you can do in a half an hour or so. But hopefully it gives you enough to start thinking and doing some researching. I encourage you to write down your questions. And after I'm finished talking, should be about 30 minutes in, please ask questions. That's going to be the best part of it as far as I'm concerned. So please ask your questions. Don't save them. Put them in the chat, and Anna and her team will be collecting them. So this is a pretty traditional picture of DevOps, right? If you notice, there's a test phase in this. And the emphasis is really on the right side of it. So when I look at this, I kind of think about that testing isn't a phase. We need to think about it a little bit different. When I hear people talk about DevOps, I hear, the buzzwords. They talk about continuous delivery and deployment. They talk about testing in production. Some people which kind of get scared when they hear that term. But mostly they talk about the deployment pipeline, and they talk about tools. What tool are you using for DevOps? And that's what I hear. But what DevOps really is, it's about values and principles to help us address business drivers, right? We use some of the practices from that previous slide. We use some of the tools, but they help us to accomplish delivering our products, right? Ones that are valuable to the customer. These things that I've got on this slide, small batches, building quality in, time to market, all of those things are the same things we talk about when we say agile, but the focus in DevOps also brings operations into the picture so that we have more consistency in our delivery. We think about the infrastructure of the system as well. Now, in this slide, I've got supports continuous testing and delivery. And I've underlined the word continuous because that word it's a great word, really is, but it's been hijacked, taken over by the tool companies to mean automation. And so tried to think of a new word, and that's where the idea of holistic came in, because holistic is just bigger and it means more. It feels better to me, actually. Now, Dan Ashby took the continuous DevOps loop. He didn't like the phase testing either. So he took it and kind of morphed it into this. And it's a really good blog post that he's written on here. So please read it. It's great. But he started this model, and we call it we test here and here and here and here. But I think he put a little bit too much emphasis on the development part, the building, the branching, the merging, the coding kind of thing. So I made a few modifications to what I think the actual infinite loop should look like. So I put a little bit more emphasis on the understanding of what we are building, because it doesn't matter how well we build it, how good our practices are, how fast we deliver, if we deliver the wrong thing. So this loop has, it's, if you wanted to think about it, the discovery, planning, understanding, build, go around to the other side, and we think about deploying, releasing, observing, and learning, and then start all over again. There's no time associated with this loop. We might go really fast through the cycle if the story or a feature is small, we know it well, or maybe we go really slow because it's new functionality with a lot of unknowns. So the customer journey, or our journey, I guess, would start with that discover. Now, this model doesn't take into account whether you're looking at the big picture or individual chunks, like a story. So it's you can use it for different kinds of things, whatever you're developing. Now, I've put small pauses in here to show that we should stop and think. For example, if we deploy to our test environment and our smoke test fails, we should stop. Think about why did it fail? Fix that before we move on. So stopping and reflecting, it's not a stage gate, but just to pause and reflect. Do we have it right up until this point? Right. And I haven't put in any feedback cycles in here because it, gets messy when you complicate it too much. Simple is best for models. Now, this particular picture is the one that I use the most because these are examples of testing activities that happen throughout the cycle. They are not meant to be the only testing activities, but they're examples, right? So we also don't talk about quality as a whole, but we're looking at the individual processes. What are we trying to do? In each of these stages, right? So for example, if we think about discovery, right? This is where we really start to build quality in from the very beginning. Are we building the right thing? So you're testing the idea. Are we going to be getting business value out of this? Right? When we think about planning, we're thinking about the risks. What are we trying to do there? And understanding, getting into more details. When we get into the building part, that's when we get into the how. For example, programmers may do a proof of concept so that they understand better. But then when they go into the building, they will do it kind of the right way. And the building is where we, code and test and where testers and developers work really close together. Once we deploy, we kind of leave the area of story testing and are more interested in the infrastructure, the quality attributes such as load, performance, recoverability, integration with other systems. When we release, we're starting to think about what does that mean to our customers, right? And then we're going to start observing our customer usage. Did we build the right thing? Are they using it the way we want? And then we start all over again, and hopefully based on what we learned from the previous loop. Now, there's two sides to this loop. Our course, which Anna has taught, right? Holistic Testing Strategies for Agile Team, that's a new name, focuses on the left side of the loop. And it touches a little bit on the right side because you can't do it in isolation. Testers who take the course or developers who take the course, because it is for the whole team, really get a good understanding of how to build quality into their products and how that whole team embraces testing activities, especially in the discover, planning, and understanding kind of ages on the left. We're also working on a new course and a little bit more advanced course where it'll be focusing on the right side, right? And that's where I'm going to talk about today is on the right side. But of course, I have to talk about that left side a little bit too. Now, testing early. We're on the left side, right? We're testing ideas. We're trying to prevent those horrible mistakes that, because we forgot to ask questions. We want to make sure that we understand what the customer's problem is. The left side is about preventing defects in code, right? Or not building something that doesn't meet the customer's needs. Right? We want to avoid those defects because defects in code cost a lot to fix. So we're trying to avoid waste, right? I think of it as a pay me now or pay me later, because you're going to. It's never wasted time to think first. Much of the testing efforts on the left side is also thinking about developing our testing strategy. Right? We're testing those ideas and assumptions. Testers are often the ones that have those critical thinking skills because of all those questions they ask. What if this? What if that? those are thinking about risks every time we ask those things. We can also work through examples with the team to get shared understanding. And it's an important task that the team should be thinking about. Now, these are just some example questions, I think, as part of the test strategy. And you should be asking them early in the cycle, because many of these questions, many of the answers will affect our pipeline and how we build it and how we test. So we want to encourage the whole team to think about, especially as exploring risks. Questions like, what's the worst thing that can happen if we deploy, right? We also want to be thinking about those quality attributes, things like accessibility or security, reliability. We have to ask them early because they become constraints on our system. We have to think about them with every single story. Perhaps our developers have to put some kind of instrumentation in to be able to think about how are we going to test. So sharing these activities means learning. It also means extra knowledge for the whole team. And when anybody can think about testing, and when everybody does think about testing, it really helps the product get better and easier to test, because we're thinking about testability. So during development, that's when we start to think about what to automate, at what level, using things like acceptance test-driven development or behavior-driven development, getting examples. These are fast feedback. We're talking about what we should do, not how. We can also do things like pair with the programmers if we find a bug. Exploratory testing is really not about what do we know. It's about what didn't we find out, what didn't we think about, because we can automate all of the things we thought about, but there's still a whole lot of other unknowns that we can't. So I'm going to jump to that right side of the loop. I'm going to talk a little bit about deployment, right? We've deployed our software, maybe integrated it into our hardware. Can be lots of different things. So we have to think about, what do we do now? This is really about finding defects, right? Left side about preventing, the right side is about finding defects before they get to our customers, ideally, right? Also, when we're thinking about the pipeline, it's really where that DevOps culture, it's really about how do we think about deployment, releasing, when we thought about development at the same time. So let's look at a pipeline. There's a lot of different activities that happen. And the title of this slide is one of my favorite quotes ever, because I really believe that testing is at the heart of DevOps. A lot of people don't think about that. That's why when I talked about that testing phase, it shows it as one little part, but it's not, because there's so many different activities and most of them are testing. So we need to think about that whole pipeline. Some of them are automated. So on this side, the blue ones are automated steps, and the yellow or orange, whatever color it's showing up on, is human-centric. They require human intervention, and you're going to need both. There are some teams that have it just about fully automated, but those are really few and far between, because there's a lot of things that we need to have human interaction with the product. We need that. So this is simplified, but these activities support each other, right? We want to think about it. So I think teams that are struggling with what that looks like, everybody has a deployment pipeline, whether you know it or not, right? So you start by drawing it. Can the team draw your pipeline? Can they walk through it? Do all team members actually understand it? I went through this with a client a couple of weeks ago, and it was amazing the questions that came out. And it was, to me, it was like little light bulbs coming off. Most of the team didn't understand what it really truly looked like. So do that as a team. What does it look like? Draw pictures. Now, you want to be thinking about your wait times, your bottlenecks, right? Does a change need, do you have to wait for somebody to sign off on something? Is there some way to make an alert so that that person knows they have to do it and you're not waiting? Or is there a different way you can get that check, if that is? So you want to be thinking about where is it waiting, because that is a waste. You want to remove human intervention if you can, but you want to make it as kind of as simple as possible. So you take one waste at a time. So for example, if you have merging issues and you're always trying to integrate and have those issues, figure out how you can change and adapt that to remove that issue. A lot of times this is hard because people don't always understand what is possible. It's kind of, think science fiction, right? Somebody thinks that you can send matter through space. Eventually that will happen because somebody thought about it. If you think about it, it likely can be done. So research it, try to figure it out. The goal of your deployment pipeline is to make feedback fast. That is really what you're thinking about. Now, when you look at your pipeline and you start asking questions, you might start with things like, what tests currently exist? Where are they run? Are they human-centric or are they automated? And again, those bottlenecks. What can we do to make this more smooth? How can we keep it running smoothly, right? So part of having that deployment pipeline is following up on failures. So how can you make those failures visible to the whole team so you can look at them? You want to be thinking about all of these little things. So in this extremely simplified example, because some pipelines are really complex, right? But you can start seeing how when we think about testing and about which test environments they run in, how we can start thinking about what should be automated. In theory, automated tests should be running in their own environment, not in something that people are messing with, like a test environment. If you have testers who are testing and adding things, your automation, if it's running against that, will fail perhaps more often than it should because somebody changed something, right? So walk through each test, each test suite, and think about the environments. We also don't only want to think about functional tests, which is often what we think about most, but we want to think about those quality attributes. How do we test for those? The other thing we need to think about is the infrastructure. Years ago, I worked with a test team that was built specifically to test the infrastructure. I find that we don't need that anymore because there's fewer and fewer physical environments. We use more virtual environments, which can be spun up to test as we need, right? And that's what we mean when we say infrastructure as code. And this becomes more and more necessary as we move down that continuous delivery cycle. Keeping that infrastructure code in the same version control, for example, as the application code, moving forward. Now, when we get to the release, right, we've deployed, we've tested all those things on our test environments. but the release to the customer is ready, or maybe almost ready. Maybe we don't want to quite give it to our customers yet. Maybe we use a technique such as blue-green deployments. So we have two identical production environments where green is the live existing production environment and blue is where the newest version of our application is. But we're still testing on it. None of our customers see it. So we might want to do some exploratory testing on here. And when we're all happy, we say, all right, let's flip the switch. And now the blue is the production version and the green will be our test version, right? So that's how we can think about testing in production before the actual rollout. Some teams use things like feature toggles, hides the feature deployed into production and only turn it on when they're completely happy with them. Or perhaps they've given the turned on version to a few customers as a canary release or a beta version. Years ago, and I remember this, when somebody said testing in production, my heart would start beating fast and I'd go, no, because it meant possibly messing with customer data. And it was scary. But today's tools, that's again, that imagination, allows us to do it safely and responsibly. So before you ever try it, make sure you read what it really means. We know that we can't replicate our production environment completely if we segregate it, right? And so we need to think about how we can actually see what the customer does. One of my go-to books for testing in DevOps is Katrina Clokey's book, Practical Guide to Testing in DevOps. She does a really good job on explaining a whole lot of different concepts. Now, I also recognize that it's not an option for all people, for all teams. For some business domains, you can't use those techniques for security reasons, right? But you can kind of monitor and observe production usage, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Time check, okay. So, observation. Our features are in production, our customers are using them. We want to observe, right? But remember when I was talking about that left side of the cycle, where we had to think about what we wanted to maybe observe, what we wanted to monitor, because we need to think about it here so that we can build it in. Developers need to put those events in, those hooks, that instrumentation, the telemetry, if you like. Because to observe, that has to be part of our code. And it has to be thought about early. So those are examples that we need to be thinking about. We want to think about how do our customers use our product? Can we detect errors before the customers do? Can we fix it before they even know what happens? But of course, that comes down to depends on how fast you can release a new fix safely, or can you back that last release out very easily? You have to have those building blocks in place, right? So having all the people in your team thinking about these things early, using their diversity, their multiple skill sets. This is how you can bring continuous delivery to a reality. But realistically, not all teams are going to want continuous delivery. But those principles behind it will help you make for a more stable release. So we want to go there. Now, the learning. Learning is just as important as anything else. Do we need to go in a different direction, pivot? Or do we need to keep doing what we're doing because our customers really like it, right? Whatever it is, we do need to pause. We need to reflect. We need to make changes deliberately. And that's kind of where experimentation comes in, right? You want to think about your goal. This is this example, right? The goal is to reduce cycle time, right? Perhaps you're delivering every 3 months and you want to reduce it to every month. Or maybe you're delivering as often as you want and you want to do something different. An example hypothesis would be, we believe in automating more tests at the API level will shorten our cycle time. So we've got automation and we're testing at the API level versus maybe automating through the whole workflow. We need to measure. If you don't have that measurement, how do you know you're getting better, right? Making it small, right? Are we on the right track? Experimentation is about doing it deliberately. So again, I'm going to go back to that whole. You want to reduce cycle time, improve quality. But if you're looking at individual silos, for example, the coding, because you think that by making the developers do TDD, it will get better. It might, right? But if you don't think about how it's going to be tested or deployed, maybe you're fixing the wrong thing. Maybe it's not the most important thing you should fix first. So really think about the big picture. You want to optimize the whole. Oh, that's a weird little thing in the middle there. You, as a team, you need to have that shared understanding about how it is implemented so that you can move forward, so you can suggest ideas. We want to build bridges, build pathways, is what Katrina Clokey calls it. Talking to people outside the team, whether it's user experience people, maybe the operations. How are we going to think about those feedback loops between those other groups? What can we do to get those questions asked early, right? We need to be able to tell, we need to be able to articulate our testing story, the why, the how. So do things like with the whole team, risk assessments on features, share with other teams, see if they can help. It really is about understanding your context and thinking about what that means within your guardrails. Call it guardrails, because that's what are our constraints of our system, of our organization. The idea of holistic testing, it's a simple concept, really simple, but it's not always easy to do, because we really need to get everyone together to talk about the level of quality we want. What are the most important quality attributes we need to test for? And the focus on value to the customer. Are we building the right thing? Now, one of the things to recognize, and it's important, is that every person has cognitive biases. I call them blinders, right? We can only see what we're looking for. So as a diverse team, having developers and testers and user experience people, operations, there's lots of kinds of diversity. We can overcome some of those unknowns, the things we didn't think about. So the last comment, the last thought I'm going to leave you with is delivering value frequently at a sustainable pace, and thinking about fast feedback so that we can build that quality in right from the very beginning. And there's some references, and I'll give this slide deck to Anna. I don't know if you're going to post it. Can you post it anywhere, Anna? Okay, perfect.
Yes, definitely.
All right. And I encourage you folks to send me emails if you like. My email is janet@agiletester.ca. I'm pretty easy to find, several contact me pages around the internet. But please, and if you want to ask more questions about the course or bringing it in, you can ask Anna or email myself. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing because we have time for Q&A.
Yes, right. Well, first I would like to remark the importance of changing the way of working, because testing is still seen as a stage in the process when in fact it's in a continuous activity that takes place in all of development activities. The infinite loop. I love that diagram and how it shows in the left side of the loop the testing we have or we can be done early, shift testing. And then in the right side of the loop is about testing to find bugs and very important to learn. Yes. I like to emphasize the way you took the example for we test here, here, and here. Yes. So to remind us that we are part of the whole team, and the whole team is part of the testing in activities in the project. I like to say that I saw the term risk on that, and I think about risk is very important. And I saw in some of the teams that they don't talk about risk, and it is something that has to be discussed with the team, something that will give us clarity about what to test, how, where, and when, right?
Yes. I think risk is a really important thing that lots of teams forget. So, for example, when the question, and probably my favorite of all times, is what is the worst thing that can happen? When I ask that to a product owner, they will say, I don't know, they might say a customer's data is all stolen, or we crash and we lose this, or they will tell you what their worst fear is, what keeps them up at night. That is the biggest risk. It is likely the biggest risk, because if you ask your product owner to say, so what's your biggest risk? They'll go, I don't know. But if you ask them, what's the worst thing that can happen to you, or what keeps you up at night, they can always answer that.
Yes, and I think, and then again, for all of us who have been involved in testing, we know that we can't test everything. And that is why it's very important to identify and discuss the risk. No? I would like to highlight is that testing should not only focus on just the application or just any code or environment. We have to do testing, a whole part of the application. And it's funny because we know that not only software fails, it also fails because a bad specification, a bad implementation of an environment, and other factors that we don't test because we are focused on testing software, right?
Yes, yeah. So I actually don't say software testing.
Yes, I know. I know it very well.
Because a lot of testers stop at software. It's a product. We're testing a product.
Yes, I know, and I love it. And well, I've been waiting to ask you this question for a long time, but I think you answer it in some way. But I want all of people to listen.
Okay.
We have heard the term continuous testing, and my question is, how is holistic testing different from continuous testing?
Yeah. So, yeah, in my mind, there shouldn't be any difference. But when I look at the literature out there, when I've done, so I do a Google search, I've done a Google search on continuous testing, and the top 10 kind of things come out, and it's all about this tool, that tool, that tool, how to automate. And so it's like I said, it's been kind of hijacked, stolen from the tool vendors to talk about automation only. And I find that kind of sad because that's not how I think about it, but so holistic brings back in those human-centric aspects of it, because there's a lot of testing that needs to happen by human beings, our critical brain functions that machines cannot do. Machines, the automation can only do what you tell it to do, unless you have a very, very good machine learning capability, or you're doing model-based testing. And I find that most teams don't have that sophistication yet. In fact, very few teams have that sophistication to be able to do model-based testing. They don't. So holistic kind of brings it all back in.
Yes, about automation, it's so true. We have to learn to focus automation on things that are done manually over and over again.
Yes.
And that would be better suited for automation. And that gives us more time to think more strategically about what else to test. Again, focus on the risk, I think.
Yep, exactly. That's exactly it, right? We don't want to, as human, well, for me, if I'm doing the same thing over and over and over again, it's a waste of my time and I get bored. And that's when I make mistakes, right? So you want to be looking at what are we missing? That's the kinds of things for sure.
Sure. And when finally, we need to consider all types of testing like we see on the loop. Not only the ones we think a tester is responsible for. It has to include automation, exploratory testing, or any type of human-centric testing, as you mentioned before, right?
Yeah.
And we have to involve the whole team,
Yes.
product owner, devs, even the customer in this.
Sometimes, yep. I noticed that Patricia asked a question, how can we make sure it's more that the team's responsibility instead of just the testers, right? Instead of more work for the testers. And part of that is getting the team to understand the importance, what they can be doing. So from a developer standpoint, for example, how do they build testability in? When we start asking those questions early, for example, if you're ready to start building in telemetry, just saying, how are we going to do that? How are we going to measure that? How are we going to test that? Because from a developer standpoint, they have to start thinking about testability. Am I making my code? Am I creating code so that it's easily testable? It's easily automated, right? And so all of a sudden that makes a whole lot less work for the tester. But that's how we make it part of the whole team, is by thinking about what aspects can people do, right? So the more work we do early will make actually less work for the testers, and they can concentrate on exactly what you were talking about. What are the biggest risks? And think about that.
Thank you. So we have other questions. We have something named Gino. I don't know if you sounds familiar. So Gino asked you to, what can we do in a typical organization where the business are, especially the leaders, do not understand that they are part of the solution, so they need to get involved during our cycle? It's a good one, Gino.
Yeah, okay. I find that sometimes it's very difficult. I do talks on culture of an organization because it really comes down to that. And sometimes if the leaders aren't willing to listen, if the leaders aren't willing to change, for example, I had a conversation with a CEO a while ago, And the teams themselves were so busy because they had too many projects going on at the same time. So I talked to the CEO and I said, this has to change. Your teams cannot get better unless you change what you're doing and how you're bringing projects in. And he told me at the time that, no, this is how we have to work. We have to work. It's the only way. So I laid out some options for him and I just kind of walked away and left it. But within the next 2 weeks, he stopped and he thought about it. And then he come back and he asked me some more questions. He didn't completely change, but he reduced the amount of projects in flight that the teams had to do. So it didn't go 100% my way, but he did move a little bit. So sometimes by showing the business and the leaders what the effect of their actions are, how does it affect the teams, sometimes that will help them understand how they also need to change. But no guarantees. A lot depends on the culture of the organization.
Yes, we have to experiment a lot.
Yes.
Well, we have another question. In your experience, Janet, how many companies already crossed the challenge and have implemented a good set of DevOps practices?
Oh, I have no idea what that is. Yeah, I really don't know what that percentage is, have crossed that chasm. I'm going to say it's fewer than you think. I keep thinking that because it's been around for a while, people keep talking about it, it should be at least half. But when I go into companies, I'm finding that it's not. There's a lot of companies that are still struggling. There's companies and teams that are still struggling with continuous integration, having a hard time getting that going for many different reasons. Some of them which are not good reasons, but so I don't have a percentage. I do know that the teams that are working towards that are getting to be better, are getting better. There's a lot of high-performing teams out there, but I think it's fewer than you think. Because when you go into especially large organizations, it's like moving a big ship. You will find a team here and a team there and a team over there that are doing really well, but the organization as a whole has a long way to go.
Okay, thank you.
I would suggest that if you look at the state of DevOps, it would probably give you some numbers on something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I've read it, but kind of skimmed through it. I don't know what the actual number is.
I can send to the participants.
And of course, it's all about numbers. It's only the people who have responded. So the teams and organizations that aren't anywhere close likely haven't responded to that survey.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Does the testing to dev ratio should be increased in this holistic testing approach when moving from waterfall model to an agile model?
That's a question I get asked a lot. My question back is always, are you going to get more testers? And of course, the answer is no. The answer is just no, you're not going to get more testers. So what I'll say my favorite kind of thing is, if I have a team that is, say 7 or 8 people, and there's say 4 developers, depending on the team, I want at least one tester on that team who's thinking about testing. Their role can be helping developers understand what they can test as well. But if I've got a team that's got 4 developers and 1 tester, and the tester is overworked because the developers are throwing it over the wall still. So they're in mini waterfall versus a true team. They're going to need more testers, but I don't think that's the answer. I think the answer is to think about whole team. How can we as a team test this better with the people we have on our team? So it's not about numbers. It's about how can we change our process so we as a team can test better. And that's what gets people thinking differently.
Yes,
you add another tester and they still do the same thing.
Yes. And we have to change our mindset and thinking about it's all of we are part of the team, the responsibilities of the quality is responsible for all of us.
Yeah.
And, yes.
And it's not really the mindset. I mean, that is, but change the behaviors. That's the first step.
The behavior.
How do we change our behavior to make that happen? Because I've heard lots of teams that say, yep, we believe in whole team testing. We believe in this. We believe in this. But when I go look at the behaviors, it's not showing that. So as a team, what can you do? Okay.
What do you think? Do you have more minutes for another question?
Sure.
Sure. Thank you. Well, it could be, maybe it's a good one, but I don't know if we have the time, but what should a test story should have?
Say that again.
What should a testing story should have?
Should a testing should have? Yeah, that could be a long question. So
I can answer it in the training also.
Yeah, exactly. A testing story. I'm going to try to keep it really short. So when I try to tell my testing story, I want to talk about what the risks are from my testing. Right? I don't care if these numbers passed and we went through this and we did this, maybe I did a bunch of exploratory test charters, maybe our automation passed or didn't pass. I want to be able to say, this is what we found, and this is what the risk is going forward. That to me, if we can articulate the risks from our testing, that will give us far more information. And if I could have a possible solution, that would be a good thing. But my role our role as testers, whoever that testing person is to articulate, what did we find? What are our risks? And that is probably one of the hardest things for people to think about. What did we test? What is the story? How confident? And I don't say go, no go. It's we've been able to test these important parts because this was the highest risk, but we didn't touch this because it was deemed low risk. We might want to touch on that a little bit more, but really it's all about risk and expressing that.
Okay, so we are going to share with you the other questions. I'm just going to read you a final comment. It's not a question, it's just a simple comment. Okay. And it says, I cannot agree more with you both that testing in production is essential for a true continuous integration strategy, but our users are always scared about the challenge that compromise testing in production. And we all know that, right? Yeah, and it's about testing safely. There's some really good articles out there. Charity Majors, I think, has a really good one about testing in production. And I can look it up and share it with you, Anna, and maybe you can share it with the viewers after. It's about being safe to do it. What does it mean? It doesn't mean going in and touching customer data. It's different. Okay. Yes, it's scary. It's very scary. So time flies and it's time to say goodbye, or how about to see you soon? Yes. Janet, it has been a real pleasure to have you in our first testing talk. of Testing IT for Mexico to Mexico, Latam, and anywhere in the world. I'm sure that all the people who are connected now have enjoyed every minute of what you have generously shared with us today. And on behalf of Testing IT and personally, I thank you infinitely for your time, and we hope to continue talking with you and Liza very soon.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's been great.
Thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias a todos los que se conectaron. Vamos a postear este video entre nuestras redes. Todas las preguntas que se quedaron las vamos a compartir con Janet para poder resolverlas más adelante. Les agradezco muchísimo, espero que les haya gustado y pues nos vemos pronto en otra plática de pruebas en Testing IT. Muchísimas gracias a todos, que tengan bonito día.
Gracias.
Thank you, Janet. Bye.
Bye-bye.